السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
The companion who I will mention today is Hazrat Muhammad bin Maslama Ansari. Hazrat Muhammad's father's name was Maslama bin Salama. His paternal grandfather's name is recorded as Salama as well as Khalid. His mother was known as Sam, and her name was Khuleda bint Abu Ubaidah. They belonged to the Aus tribe of the Ansar and was a confederate of the Abd Ashal tribe. Hazrat Muhammad bin Maslama was known by the filial appellation of Abu Abdullah or Abdur Rahman, and also Abu Sa'id has been cited. According to Allama Ibn Hajar, the title of Abu Abdullah is more authentic. According to one narration, he was born 22 years before the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was appointed to the station of prophethood, and he was among those people who was named as Muhammad in the age of Jahiliyyah, or the period of ignorance before Islam. The Jews of Medina were anticipating the advent of a prophet who, according to the prophecy of Moses, peace be upon him, would be named Muhammad. When the Arabs came to know of this, they began to name their children as Muhammad. In the books pertaining to the life and character of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, the people who were named Muhammad as a good omen numbered between 3 to 15. Allama Sohaili, who has written the commentary on Sirat ibn Hisham, has recorded 3 individuals with the name Muhammad. Allama ibn Nasir has recorded 5 names, whereas Abdul Wahhab Shirani has recorded 15 names. For information and general knowledge, I will list the 15 names. They include Muhammad bin Sufyan, Muhammad bin Ukhayya, Muhammad bin Humran, Muhammad bin Khuzai, Muhammad bin Adi, Muhammad bin Usama, Muhammad bin Bara, Muhammad bin Haris, Muhammad bin Harmaz, Muhammad bin Kholi, Muhammad bin Yahmad, Muhammad bin Yazid, Muhammad bin Usaidi, and Muhammad Faqimi, and Hazrat Muhammad bin Maslama. Hazrat Muhammad bin Maslama was among the very early converts of Islam. He accepted Islam through Hazrat Musab bin Umair before Hazrat Sa'ad bin Muaz. When Hazrat Abu Ubaidah bin al-Jarrah migrated to Medina, the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, established a bond of brotherhood between him and Hazrat Muhammad bin Maslama. Hazrat Muhammad bin Maslama was among those Sahaba or companions who killed Ka'b bin Ashraf and Abu Rafi Salam bin Abu Huqaiq. Both of these individuals were extremely mischievous and relentless in their efforts to cause harm to Muslims, and they even sought to launch an attack against the Muslims and the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him himself. Consequently, the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, assigned these companions with the task of killing them. During various ghazwat or battles or expeditions, Hazrat Muhammad bin Maslama was appointed by the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, to oversee or supervise Medina. His sons, Jafar, Abdullah, Saad, Abdul Rahman and Umar are also counted amongst the Sahaba or the companions of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. Except for the Battle of Tabuk, Hazrat Muhammad bin Maslama took part in all the battles, including the Battle of Badr and Uhud. During the Battle of Tabuk, Hazrat Muhammad bin Maslama took permission from the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, to remain behind in Medina. As mentioned earlier, Hazrat Muhammad bin Maslama was among those who were assigned with a mission to kill the two mischievous individuals. I have already mentioned details of this incident in relation to Hazrat Ubadah bin Bishr around 1.5 years ago. Therefore, I shall mention some details again briefly, but there are also some other details in relation to this incident which I shall cite. With reference to the killing of Ka'b bin Ashraf, Hazrat Bashir Ahmed Sahib has written in Sirat Khatamun Nabiyeen, the life and character of the seal of prophets, as follows. The manner in which the Battle of Badr brought forth the heartfelt enmity of the Jewish people of Medina, and they continue to grow in their mischief and disturbances. As such, the incident of the execution of Ka'b bin Ashraf is also a link in this very chain. Although Ka'b was a Jew by religion, he was not actually Jewish by descent. Rather, he was an Arab. His father, Ashraf, was a very clever and cunning individual of the Banu Nibhan, who came to Medina and developed relations with the Banu Nadir and became the confederate. Ultimately, he managed to gain such power and influence that head chief of the Banu Nadir, Abu Rafi and Abil Huqaiq, gave him his daughter in marriage. It was this very daughter who gave birth to Ka'b, who grew to attain an even greater status than that of his father. This was to such an extent that ultimately he took on such a capacity that all of the Jews of Arabia began to accept him as their chief. From a moral perspective, he was a man of extremely ill morals and was a master in the art of secret schemes and conspiracies. Hazur says he was extremely cunning in his ill deeds, causing strife and dissension and the spread of evil. In any case, this continues that when the Holy Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina along with the other Jews, Ka'b bin Ashraf also participated in the treaty which the Holy Prophet drafted. The Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, drafted between the Jews with regards to mutual friendship, peace, security, and collective defense. However, deep within, the fire of malice and enmity began to burn in the heart of Ka'b, and he began to oppose Islam and the founder of Islam through secret schemes and conspiracies. However, after this, the opposition of Gharb took on a more dangerous form, and ultimately, after the Battle of Badr, he began to employ such conduct as was extremely mischievous and seditious, and created very dangerous circumstances for the Muslims. However, on the occasion of Badr, when the Muslims were granted an extraordinary victory, and most of the chieftains of the Quraysh were slain, he understood that this new religion would not die out by itself. Hazur says initially he thought that this newly found religion would soon come to an end. But when he witnessed the outcome of the Battle of Badr, he realized that Islam would not simply fade away. So the account continues that hence after the Battle of Badr, he resolved to exert his best efforts to abolish and utterly destroy the religion of Islam. When Gharb was assured that the victory at Badr had granted Islam such strength as was beyond his wildest dreams, he was overcome with anger and rage. He immediately prepared for a journey and took to Makkah, and upon arriving there, by the power of his persuasive speech and the poetic tongue, inflamed the fire that was kindling in the hearts of the Quraysh. He created an unquenchable thirst in their hearts for Muslim blood, and he filled their bosoms with sentiments of revenge and enmity. Then, when their emotions had been immensely sparked as a result of his incitement, Gharb took them to the courtyard of the Kaaba, and handing them the drapes of the Kaaba, he had them swear on oath that they would not rest until Islam and the founder of Islam had been entirely obliterated and wiped out from the face of the earth. After this wretched person turned to the other tribes of Arabia, and travelling from tribe to tribe, he incited various people against the Muslims. Then he returned to Medina, and whilst composing tashbib, that is, he alluded to the Muslim woman in a very filthy and obscene manner, in very provocative couplets of poetry. In doing so, he did not even spare the woman from the household of the Holy Prophet ﷺ in his horrible couplets of poetry. And he had these couplets widely publicized throughout the land. Or ultimately, he hatched a conspiracy to assassinate the Holy Prophet ﷺ himself. Under the ploy of inviting people to a dinner feast, he invited the Holy Prophet to his own residence. However, with the grace of the Almighty Allah, they were informed in time, and information was received in advance, and the plan became a failure. In light of the treaty which had been settled between the inhabitants of Medina upon his arrival, the Holy Prophet ﷺ was the commander of the democratic state of Medina. Thus, when the state of affairs escalated to such an extent, and charges of infraction of treaty, rebellion, inciting war, sedition, use of foul language, and conspiracy to assassinate the Holy Prophet had been established, so he issued that Ka'b bin Ashraf was liable to be put to death as a result of his actions. However, due to the conspiracies of Ka'b, since the atmosphere of Medina at the time was such that if a formal announcement had been made before his killing, there was a possibility that civil war may have erupted in Medina. And there was no telling how much massacre and carnage and bloodshed would have ensued as a result. The Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was willing to offer any possible and reasonable sacrifice in order to prevent international violence and bloodshed. That is, the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, instructed that Gharb should not be killed publicly. Rather, a few people should quietly find an opportunity and put an end to him. The Holy Prophet signed his faithful companion Muhammad bin Maslama and emphasized that whatever strategy was devised should be executed with the counsel of Sa'ad bin Mu'adh. Muhammad Maslama said, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, in order to kill him silently, we shall be required to say something, which meant that some excuse would be required, by which Gharb could be lured out of his residence and executed in a secure location. Taking into account the grave consequences which could have arisen if a covert and secret operation had been ruled out, the Holy Prophet ﷺ said, Okay then. As such, with the counsel of Sa'ad bin Mu'adh, Muhammad bin Maslama took Abu Naila and 2 or 3 other companions along and reached the residence of Gharb. They called Gharb out from his living quarters and said, Our chief, that is Muhammad ﷺ, demands charity of us, while we are of straitened circumstances. Would you be so kind as to give us a loan? Upon hearing this, Gharb jumped up with joy and said, By God, this is nothing. The day is not far when you shall become averse to him and abandon him, that is Muhammad ﷺ. So Muhammad bin Maslama responded, In any case, we have already accepted Muhammad ﷺ, and now we are waiting to see the final outcome of this message, but you tell us whether you will give us a loan or not. Of course, said Gharb, but you will be required to deposit something as a collateral. Muhammad inquired, What do you require? This wretched person responded, Leave your woman as collateral. Suppressing his anger, Muhammad bin Maslama said, How is it possible for us to leave our woman as collateral to a person like yourself? He responded, All right, then your sons shall be left as collateral. Muhammad said, This is not possible either. We cannot bear the reproach of the whole of Arabia. Albeit, if you are open-hearted enough, we are willing to leave our arms or weapons with you as collateral. So Gharb agreed, and Muhammad bin Maslama and his companions left with a promise to return at night. At nightfall, this party arrived at the residence of Gharb with the weapons. They were now able to openly take their arms along, according to that agreement. They were able to openly take their weapons along. When they had let Gharb out of his home, they brought him to one side during the course of discussions. After some time walking along, Muhammad bin Maslama or some other companion raised his hand towards the head of Gharb by some excuse, and with great speed, taking firm hold of his hair, he called out to his companions, Strike now. The companions, who were already prepared and armed, wielded their swords at once, and finally Gharb was killed and fell to the ground. Muhammad bin Maslama and his friends or companions, and then they hurriedly presented themselves to the Holy Prophet and conveyed to him the news of this execution. When the news of this execution of Gharb became known, a tremor rippled through the city, and the Jewish people became very deeply enraged. The following day, a delegation of Jews presented themselves before the Holy Prophet and complained that the leader Gharb bin Ashraf had been killed in such and such way. The Prophet ﷺ listened to what they had to say and said, Are you also aware of the crimes which Gharb has committed and is guilty of? Then the Holy Prophet ﷺ reminded them briefly of all the evil conspiracies, machinations and schemes which Gharb was guilty of. Upon this, the people became fearful and decided to stay silent. After this, the Holy Prophet ﷺ, at least from now onwards, you should stay in peace and harmony and live as such, and do not sow the seed of enmity, violence, and strife. As such, with the agreement of the Jews, a new treaty was drafted, and the Jews promised once again to live with the Muslims in peace and harmony and to abstain from a course of violence and disorder. If Gharb was, then the Jewish people would not have so readily accepted a new treaty, and they would not have remained silent upon his killing. Anyhow, they formed this new treaty that we will now stay and live in peace. Nowhere in history is it recorded that after this the Jews ever mentioned the execution of Gharb bin Ashraf and accused the Muslims, for in their hearts they knew that Gharb received the deserving and rightful punishment that was liable to him. Some Western historians have written immensely on the issue of the execution of Gharb bin Ashraf and present this incident as an unpleasant blemish upon the character of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and they level allegations to this effect. However, what needs to be studied is that firstly, was this killing in itself a justified action or not? Secondly, was the method that was employed for this execution justifiable or not? First of all, what should be remembered is that Gharb bin Ashraf had entered into a formal agreement and treaty of peace and security with the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. Scheming against the Muslims was out of question, especially when he had agreed to support the Muslims against all external and foreign enemies, and to maintain friendly relations with the Muslims. By virtue of this treaty, he had also accepted that the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, would be the chief executive of the democratic state which had been established in Medina, and that the verdict of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, would be legally binding in all disputes. Therefore, historical evidence proves that under this very treaty, Jewish people present their cases before the Holy Prophet, and he would administer verdicts to them. In these circumstances, ignoring all of his treaties and agreements, Gharb committed treason against the Muslims, but in fact against the government. He planted a seed of violence and disorder in Medina. He attempted to provoke a fire of war within the country and dangerously incited the tribes of Arabia against the Muslims. He composed provocative poetry against a Muslim woman while composing Tashbib, and he conspired to assassinate the Holy Prophet. It was impossible that some action should not be taken against him. Was there any punishment lesser than death which could have brought an end to this mischievous behavior of the Jews? Even today, in countries which are known as civilized, when a criminal is guilty of the crimes of rebellion, infraction of a treaty or pact, inciting wars and attempted assassination, is such a person not administered the death penalty? Hazrat Mirza Bashir Ahmad Sahib writes, the second question relates to the method of the execution. So the question then arises with relation to the actual methodology of the execution or killing. So the question is, what was the methodology? With regards to this issue, it should be remembered that there was no formal ruling power in Arabia at the time. Rather, every individual and every tribe was free and independent. In this state, which court of law existed where a case could be filed against Gharb and a formal judgment for his execution could be sought? Should a complaint have been lodged with the Jews, of whom he was a leader, and who had themselves committed treachery against the Muslims and would create disorder every other day? Should the case have been presented before the Quraysh of Makkah, who were thirsty for the blood of Muslims? Should justice instead have been sought from the tribes of Sulaim and Ghatafan, who had planned to launch a sudden attack on Medina at night on 3 or 4 occasions the last few months alone. Hazrat Mirza Bashir Ahmad says, so reflect on the state of Arabia at the time, and then contemplate that when a person was guilty of provoking in this way, of inciting war, of mischievous behavior, and of attempted assassination, and due to this his remaining alive was felt to be a threat to their own security and to the security of the country. What other alternative was available to the Muslims except for executing such a person when the opportunity presented itself in the consideration of self-defense? It is far more beneficial for an evil and violent person to be executed as opposed to the lives of many peace-abiding citizens to be put to danger and the peace of the country to be ruined. Then, as mentioned, in light of the treaty which took place between the Muslims and the Jews after the migration, the Holy Prophet did not possess the capacity of a trivial citizen. On the contrary, he had now become the chief of the democratic state which had been established in Medina. The Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, had been given the authority to issue whatever verdict he deemed appropriate with respect to all disputes and political affairs. Hence, in interest of the country's peace, if the Holy Prophet declared Ka'b as being worthy of being given the death penalty due to his mischievous behavior, what right does anyone possess to object to this verdict of the Holy Prophet? Further, historical evidence establishes that even the Jewish people themselves found this punishment of Ka'b as being reasonable in light of his crimes. They took to silence without raising a single objection. If the allegation is raised that prior to the verdict of execution, why were the Jews not summoned so that the crimes of Ka'b could have been listed, and then after proof had been completely furnished, his killing could have been formally and publicly announced? The answer to this is that at the time the situation prevalent was very sensitive, and if such a method had been employed, there was a serious threat of the rise of intertribal conflict. It would not have been surprising at all for a dangerous chain of violence and bloodshed and civil war to have broken out in Medina. Hence, in the likeness of those tasks which proved to be more beneficial if done quickly and also silently, taking into consideration public peace, the Holy Prophet deemed it appropriate to quietly issue the verdict relevant to the punishment of Ka'b. However, this did not involve deception of any kind, nor did the Holy Prophet intend to keep this punishment secret permanently, because as soon as a delegation of Jewish people came to the Holy Prophet ﷺ the following morning, the Holy Prophet ﷺ immediately and without hesitation related the entire account. And he took the full responsibility of this action himself, and the Holy Prophet thereby proved that there was no question of deception or anything of that sort. Moreover, the Holy Prophet ﷺ clearly told the Jews that on the basis of such and such grave crimes, this punishment was exercised upon Ka'b, and that it was issued upon his express order. Then the allegation remains that apparently the Holy Prophet gave his companions permission to lie and cheat is absolutely incorrect, and authentic narrations completely reject this notion. The Holy Prophet ﷺ never ever gave permission to lie or speak falsehood. Rather, according to the narration in Sahih Bukhari, when Muhammad bin Maslama said to the Holy Prophet ﷺ that in order to execute Ka'b silently, taking into consideration the immense benefits which were reason for a silent punishment to be meted in the first place, the Holy Prophet responded merely by saying, "Okay then." On this occasion, there was no further explanation or clarification by either the Holy Prophet or Muhammad bin Maslama. The Holy Prophet only intended that in order for Muhammad bin Maslama and his companions to bring Ka'b outside upon reaching his home, they would surely be required to say something, as a result of which Ka'b would willingly and happily leave his home and come along with them. There is absolutely nothing wrong with this. During a time of war, when spies are sent on a task or mission, they too are required to say such things. and no sensible individual can ever criticize this. Therefore, in any case, the character of the Holy Prophet is completely pure. Now remains the issue of Muhammad bin Maslama and his companions who went there and said these things. As such, even in their dialogue, there is nothing about it which can be deemed immoral. In actuality, they did not say anything false. Albeit, taking into consideration the purpose of their mission, they did use certain words which could be construed in more than one way. So there were words that could be interpreted in one way or the other, but there was no other option for them to take. In a state of war, for a good and righteous cause, such a mild diversion from simple and straightforward words cannot be objectionable at all in the eyes of a sensible and honest individual. Now, some people have also raised the question that is it allowed to deceive and lie in war? In some narrations, it has been said that the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, would say, Al-Harbu Khuddan, that war is but a deception. The meaning inferred by this is that God forbid the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, permitted the use of deception in war. Although in the first place the words Al-Harbu Khudda do not mean that it is permissible to use deception in war. Rather, the only meaning which is implied here is that war is in itself a kind of deception. In other words, with regards to the outcome of war, there can be no definitive statement as to what shall happen. That is to say that there are so many varying factors which affect the course of war that irrespective of the course of events, a statement cannot be passed with respect to its outcome. This meaning is supported by the fact that this narration has been related in the hadith in two ways. In one narration, the words are that the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, has said, Al-Harbu Khudda, that war is but a deception. In the second narration, Samma al-Harba Khudda, the Holy Prophet has named war as being deceit. Now, when both of these traditions are combined, the definitive outcome which is derived is that the Holy Prophet never condoned the use of deception in war. Rather, he meant that war itself is a thing which deceives a person. However, even if one insists upon interpreting this to mean that deception is permitted in war, even still, most surely at this instance, the word deception infers strategies and tactics of war, and falsehood and betrayal are not implied at all. The reason is that in this instance, the word khudatan infers maneuvers and strategies of war, not falsehood and deception. Therefore, the meaning is that it is not prohibited to catch the enemy off guard and apprehend or subdue them by means of some strategy or tactic. There are different ways of strategies and maneuvering. For example, it is established by authentic narrations that when the Holy Prophet would set out on a campaign, he would normally not disclose his final destinations. At times, even if he intended to travel south, at the start of his journey, he would head towards the north, and then he would divert towards the south. Then, if someone would inquire of him as to where he had come from, instead of mentioning Medina, he would name a close or far-off location where he had previously set up camp, or he would employ some other lawful strategy of war, to the same effect as the Holy Quran has indicated. At times, in order to throw off their enemy, the companions would begin to retreat from the field of battle. And when the enemy would least expect it, and when its ranks would become dispersed or disarranged, they would then launch a surprise attack. All of these are examples of khudatun, which has been deemed lawful in a state of war. Even today, this continues to be considered permissible. However, to deal with falsehood and treachery is something which Islam has very strictly forbidden. As such, the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, would generally say, in Islam, after associating partners with God and usurping the rights of parents, the third greatest sin is speaking a lie. Furthermore, he would state that belief and cowardice can come together at one place. But belief and falsehood can never come together at one place. Then with regards to deception and treachery, he remarked, a person who commits treachery shall be subjected to the severe wrath of Allah on the day of resurrection. Therefore, the kind of khudatun which has been permitted in war is not actual deception or falsehood. Rather, it infers the use of such strategies and tactics of war which are employed to catch the enemy off guard and to vanquish it. In some instances, this may seem to apparently resemble falsehood and deception, but in actuality, it is not so. As such, the following hadith confirms our stance. Hazrat Mirza Bashir Ahmad Sahib, that the following hadith confirms our stance, and that tradition or narration is that Kulsum bint Aqba relates. There are only 3 instances where I have found the Holy Prophet to permit the use of such statements, which do not actually constitute falsehood, but ordinary people may construe them as such. The first is war. The second is when reconciling between 2 people who are at conflict or quarreling with one another. Thirdly, it is when a husband or wife say something which is intended to please or gratify the other. So the intention should be pious in every single circumstance, or the outcome that one desires should be a righteous one. So he continues that this hadith leaves no room for doubt in the fact that the kind of khudatun which is permitted in war does not imply falsehood and deception. Rather, what is inferred are such things which must be employed at times as tactics of war, and which are considered to be lawful in every nation and in every religion. After mentioning the account of Ka'b bin Ashraf, Ibn Hisham has recorded the narration that after the killing of Ka'b, the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, instructed the companions that now they should slay any Jew they were able to apprehend. Hence, one companion by the name of Mahisa attacked a Jew and killed him. The same narration has been related in Abu Dawood as well. The source of both these narrations is Ibn Ishaq. Hazrat Mirza Bashir Ahmad Sahib writes that in light of the Ilm-e Rawayat, or the science of narration, this narration is weak and unreliable. The Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, has never said this, because Ibn Hisham has recorded it without a chain of narration, and the chain of narrators which has been provided by Abu Dawood is weak and incomplete. In this chain of narrators, Ibn Ishaq states that he heard this incident from a freed slave of Zayd bin Sabit, and that anonymous slave heard this incident. Hazrat says that the person is nameless. Hazrat Mirza Bashir Ahmad Sahib continues that he heard this incident from an unknown daughter of Mahisa. Hazrat says, similarly, this daughter is anonymous in the sense that we cannot find in the name of this person in the narrations. And then this continues that the daughter heard this incident from her father. Now, any individual can understand that a narration of this type, where 2 narrators are absolutely anonymous and unknown, cannot be acceptable in the very least. Moreover, even if a person contemplates in terms of dirayat, this tale does not hold true, because the general practice of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, categorically refutes the notion that he would ever issue forth such a general order. Furthermore, if this was a general order, then certainly as a result there should have been numerous murders or killings of this sort. However, narrations have only reported a single exclusive case. This substantiates that this was not a general order. Then, when it is established in light of the authentic narrations that the very next day a new treaty was settled and agreed with the Jews, in such a case it cannot be accepted at all that a command of this nature would have been issued. If such an incident had actually occurred, the Jewish people would surely raise their clamor. However, no historical account demonstrates that any such complaint was lodged by the Jewish people. Therefore, in terms of both Rawayat and Dirayat, this tale proves to be completely false. If this narration can be taken to possess any truth at all, then only insomuch that when an outcry broke out in Medina after the killing of Ka'b bin Ashraf, and the Jewish people became enraged, perceiving a threat from the Jews, the Holy Prophet may have told the companions that in self-defense they were permitted to slay any such Jew who posed a threat and attack them. However, it seems as if this atmosphere existed for only a few hours. Even if we take it as a possibility, it was only for a few hours, because the very next day a new treaty was settled with the Jews. And a state of peace and security was brought about once again. He then continues to write that there is a slight difference of opinion with regards to the date of the execution of Ka'b bin Ashraf. Ibn Sa'd has stated that it occurred in Rabiul Awwal, 3rd after Hijri. However, Ibn Hisham has placed it after the Sariyah of Zayd bin Harith, which is confirmed to have taken place in Jamadiul Akhirah. At this instance, I have maintained the order adopted by Ibn Hisham. Hazur says, anyhow, there are further details and accounts to be given. Inshallah, God willing, I will relate them in future.
Alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. عباد الله رحمكم الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله يذكركم وادعوه يستجب لكم ولذكر الله أكبر.